Welcome to Year 10 Environmental Science. Chapter 1, Ecosystem. There are 6 lessons in this chapter. Let's start with organisms. So what is organisms? Organisms exist in interconnected environments, engaging with both biotic and abiotic factors. They interact not only with each other but also with their physical surroundings. For example, organisms consume one another and compete for resources like food, space, mates, and nesting sites. The survival of flowering plants often hinges on their ability to attract pollinators such as insects and birds to aid in pollination and seed dispersal. Additionally, organisms modify their environments. Worms, for instance, inhabit soil where they break down dead plant material, recycle nutrients, and create tunnels that improve soil aeration. Like all living things, worms take in oxygen, water, and nutrients, while excreting carbon dioxide and waste. Plants also absorb carbon dioxide and release oxygen through photosynthesis. Without the early photosynthetic organisms that emerged billions of years ago, Earth's atmosphere would lack oxygen, resulting in a drastically different biosphere. Humans also interact with other organisms and influence their surroundings. For example, Sherbrooke Forest in the Dandenong Ranges near Melbourne is a tall eucalyptus forest that hosts lyrebirds, wombats, and other native species. Unfortunately, lyrebirds are becoming increasingly scarce due to 2 main factors. Domestic pets, like cats and dogs, hunt them, and the surrounding roads limit their habitat. This urban encroachment has led to denser growth of wiregrass, reducing the open areas where lyrebirds can forage for insects and worms. By studying ecosystems and understanding their dynamics, we can apply this knowledge to restore previously damaged areas. For instance, ecologists have been actively working on rehabilitating native grasslands, which are among Australia's most degraded ecosystems. Organisms within a specific area, like the superb lyrebird, coexist in populations. Various populations, such as lyrebirds, tree ferns, and insects, together form communities. An ecological community is defined as a group of different species that inhabit a particular place and interact at a specific time. For example, a collection of insects, spiders, mosses, fungi, and bacteria on a decaying tree trunk forms a community where the spider preys on insects, insects feed on one another and on fungi, while moss retains moisture essential for all organisms. What is ecosystem? An ecosystem comprises a community of living organisms interacting with each other and their physical environment at a specific time and place. By understanding these interactions and ecosystem functions, we can prevent past mistakes that have led to environmental degradation and biodiversity loss. We can view all areas of Earth where life exists as part of a single ecosystem, the biosphere. However, because of Earth's size and complexity, we often study smaller specific areas, each termed an ecosystem. For example, freshwater ponds, tidal rock pools, and mangrove forests are distinct aquatic ecosystems, while tropical forests represent the most complex terrestrial ecosystems with the highest species diversity. In contrast, deserts are simpler ecosystems, characterized by fewer species, high sunlight, and low rainfall, with organisms specially adapted to thrive in harsh conditions. Urban environments created by humans are also classified as ecosystems. Let's start with habitat. So what is a habitat? A habitat is the specific place where an organism lives, like its address. For example, the rock-walking species lives in rocky areas within open eucalyptus forests, while water lilies grow in ponds. Bush rats are found in forests, and swamp rats prefer grasslands and heathlands. Within a habitat, there are smaller areas called microhabitats. These microhabitats provide slightly different conditions. For instance, the moist trunk of a soft tree fern in a wet forest is a microhabitat for small snails, insects, and fungi. While organisms can live in various environments, factors like competition and resources eventually limit them to specific areas where they can survive and reproduce. This specific area is called a niche. For example, in an Australian desert, 3 related lizard species live in the same hot, dry conditions and eat termites. However, each lizard species hunts different sizes of insects. The largest lizard eats the biggest insects, while the smallest lizard eats the tiniest ones. Because they target different prey sizes, they have less competition for food and occupy different niches. When ecologists study an ecosystem, they give it a name to make it easier to understand. Ecosystems can be classified by their physical characteristics, such as being freshwater, marine, or terrestrial. Each of these categories has different types. For instance, freshwater ecosystems can include ponds and lakes, marine ecosystems might be rocky shores or coral reefs, and terrestrial ecosystems can range from tropical forests to alpine areas. Often, ecosystems are named based on their living organisms, particularly the dominant species, which is the most noticeable or abundant in that community. Lesson 3, Biomes and Food Chains. When researchers categorize ecosystems on a worldwide scale, they refer to the term biome. A biome is a large classification primarily based on climate. These biomes are distributed across the globe, each exhibiting distinct structures. For instance, the rainforest biome includes various types of dense forests and is found in regions with high and consistent rainfall throughout the year. Conversely, the desert biome occurs in arid areas with minimal rainfall. Some deserts, like the sandy Sahara, have limited plant life, while others in Australia are characterized by dry shrublands. Most temperate forests in Australia are classified as evergreen forest biomes. To gain insight into an ecosystem, you can concentrate on a specific location. A useful approach for examining the biological aspects of an ecosystem, the community, is to analyze a sample area called a quadrat. A quadrat is a square, rectangular, or circular area of any size that is marked off using tapes, pegs, or a frame. In studies of tidal rock platforms, grasslands, or gardens, a common size is typically 1 square meter. Within a quadrat, scientists can document which species are present and their abundance. Quadrats can be marked temporarily or permanently, enabling researchers to track changes in the types and numbers of organisms over time. For example, quadrats in a garden can be regularly monitored to study the growth of plants such as weeds. They can also be employed in experiments to assess the impacts of overwatering, shading, or added fertilizers, as well as to identify seeds introduced by animal manure. Quadrats can be placed randomly within a study area or arranged at regular intervals along a line known as a transect. A transect is useful for illustrating changes in communities that develop distinct zones. For instance, a transect can be utilized to sample and describe the transition from eucalypt forests to heathland. Another transect extending from the ocean inland can demonstrate changes from seagrass, closest to the ocean, to mangroves and salt marsh communities, which are linked to sediment accumulation along the coast. Additionally, environmental factors such as soil or water pH, light intensity, salinity, and land slope can be measured along a transect to explore their relationships with changes in biological communities. A food chain illustrates the relationships between different organisms in an ecosystem. For example, in an eucalyptus tree, a kookaburra feeds on a skink, which in turn eats insects that consume eucalyptus leaves. Plants and algae, such as those in a pond or eucalyptus trees in a forest, serve as the foundational link in the food chain. As autotrophs, they produce their own food through photosynthesis, a process that captures sunlight to convert carbon dioxide and water into sugar. Therefore, these photosynthetic organisms are known as producers. All other organisms are classified as heterotrophs, as they obtain their food from other sources, making them consumers. There are 6 types of consumers: Herbivores, carnivores, parasites, scavengers, detritivores, decomposers. Herbivores are animals grazed directly on producers. For example, deer, sheep, and cows. Carnivores are consumers that eat other consumers, known as prey. Predators catch live prey, while first-order carnivores feed directly on herbivores. For example, lions and tigers. Parasites specialized consumers that live on or inside other organisms, often harming them. For example, fleas, lice, and tick. Scavengers are consumers that eat dead animals. For example, raccoons, wolves, and condors. Detritivores consume small particles of dead organic matter and waste, such as decomposing leaves or animal remains. For example, worms, dung beetles, fiddler crabs, and sea cucumbers. Decomposers break down dead material. Unlike detritivores, decomposers secrete enzymes to decompose organic matter and then absorb the nutrients, for example, fungi and bacteria. Many food chains follow a predator-prey dynamic. A simple example from a pond would be a catfish that feeds on smaller fish, which in turn eat algae. The food chain involving the kookaburra, skink, insect, and eucalyptus tree also represents a predator-prey relationship. Generally, predators tend to eat prey that are smaller than themselves. Large fish eat smaller fish. In a single ecosystem, there can be over 100 interconnected food chains, forming a food web. Most organisms consume multiple types of food. Each feeding level in a food web is called a trophic level. Producers occupy the first trophic level, while consumers are at higher levels. Herbivores, which feed on producers, are at the second trophic level, while first-order carnivores that eat herbivores are at the third level, and so on. The complexity of food webs contributes to ecosystem stability. In a simple food chain, removing one species can have a drastic impact on others, whereas in a complex web, the loss of one species often has a lesser effect due to the availability of alternative food sources. The presence of other organisms can limit the distribution of some species through interspecific competition. This occurs when different species compete for the same limited resources, such as food, water, space, or nesting sites. Since similar resources are utilized, green plants compete with other plants, herbivores with other herbivores, and predators with other predators. Competition can result in one species being displaced from a habitat by another. However, the displaced species may still survive in adjacent areas of the habitat. Lesson 4: Important factors affecting organism survival. The living world is home to a vast diversity of organisms, but many share common requirements for survival. These essential needs include energy, oxygen, water, and nutrients. All organisms require a source of energy, which varies based on the type of organism, its growth stage, activity level, and reproductive state. Most organisms depend on oxygen to efficiently release chemical energy during cellular respiration. Organisms need water and nutrients for growth, maintenance, and repair. They are composed of water and organic compounds, including proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, vitamins, and minerals. As they utilize energy and conduct cellular processes, organisms produce various substances that can be wasteful or even harmful. These waste products are typically expelled into the environment. Plants and animals have distinct lifestyles and strategies for obtaining nutrients and energy, transporting materials, dealing with waste, and reproducing. In ecology, autotrophs and heterotrophs are terms used to describe these differing feeding strategies. Plants are autotrophs, meaning they create their own food. They synthesize organic molecules from simple inorganic substances obtained from their surroundings. Stationary, they utilize extensive root systems to absorb water and minerals from the soil and large leaf surfaces to capture sunlight and exchange gases. Autotrophs use environmental energy to produce glucose by combining carbon dioxide from the air with water. Most autotrophs, including plants and algae, are photosynthetic and derive energy from sunlight. In contrast, Animals, which are heterotrophs, cannot synthesize glucose from simple inorganic compounds. They obtain necessary organic compounds by consuming other organisms or their products. Animals convert the organic molecules they ingest into the types of organic molecules they need. To avoid exhausting local food sources, most animals are mobile, enabling them to seek out food. Additionally, many animals engage in communal care of their young, a trait particularly developed in mammals. Plants require fewer types of nutrients compared to animals. They can produce all the materials they need from carbon dioxide, water, and inorganic nutrients. Essential inorganic nutrients include elements such as nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus, and magnesium. During photosynthesis, plants convert glucose into other sugars, lipids, and cellulose. When provided with light, water, and carbon dioxide, plants synthesize glucose in chloroplasts through photosynthesis, also known as carbon fixation, as carbon atoms from the air are incorporated into organic molecules. Various factors such as light intensity, carbon dioxide levels, and temperature can limit the rate of photosynthesis. Lesson 5, Energy Transfer. Food chains and food webs illustrate that all consumers ultimately rely on producer organisms, primarily photosynthetic algae and plants. These producers convert sunlight, a form of energy, into chemical energy, which is stored in their cells and tissues. Herbivores, carnivores, scavengers, and decomposers obtain their energy indirectly, second, third, or even fourth hand. Thus, the flow of energy through an ecosystem is a fundamental process. The energy we derive from foods like vegetables, grains, honey, and meat can all be traced back to photosynthesis and sunlight. The energy in natural gas or oil, used for heating, also originates from ancient plants that once photosynthesized. Most solar energy that reaches ecosystems is either absorbed, scattered, or reflected by the atmosphere and Earth's surface, with less than 1% of visible light hitting a green leaf being converted into chemical energy. Nonetheless, this small fraction is sufficient to produce around 160 billion tons of organic matter annually. Herbivores are the first-level consumers. Herbivores cannot consume all the plant biomass in an ecosystem. In fact, they only eat less than 10% of the available vegetation. Much of what they consume is indigestible, and the digestible portion is utilized for daily activities or lost as heat through cellular respiration. Consequently, the energy from producers that is converted into new animal tissue is minimal, leading to a total mass of animal tissue being significantly less than that of plant tissue. Carnivores are more efficient than herbivores at extracting energy from their food because they can digest more of it. However, similar to producers and herbivores, carnivores also use part of their food for energy to sustain their daily activities. As a result, the energy represented by carnivores' biomass is lower than that of the herbivores they consume. With each energy transfer along a food chain from producers to herbivores and then to carnivores, there is a decrease in the amount of available energy and biomass. This phenomenon is known as the ecological pyramid of energy or biomass. The energy accessible to higher-level carnivores at the top of the pyramid is very limited compared to that available at the base among producers. This decline in energy restricts the length of food chains, typically to 2 to 5 trophic levels. Because only a small amount of energy remains at the end of a typical food chain, top carnivores often survive by consuming a diverse range of foods. Lesson 6. Ecosystem communities and energy flow. Ecosystem communities consist of populations from various species of organisms. The interactions between these populations and their environment facilitate the recycling of matter and the flow of energy within the ecosystem. This matter recycling, along with interactions with abiotic factors, allows ecosystems to be self-sustaining. An ecological balance is essential for the survival and reproduction of all populations in the community, enabling the ecosystem to persist into the future, provided there is a continuous energy input from the sun. Producers capture solar energy and convert it into chemical energy through photosynthesis. Some of this energy is utilized by the producers themselves, some is released into the atmosphere, and the rest is transferred through food chains to consumers. Energy flows through the ecosystem in a structured manner, which can be illustrated through food chains and food webs. Food chains depict the direction of energy flow, while interconnected food chains form a comprehensive food web. In a food chain, each feeding level is referred to as a trophic level. Producers make up the first trophic level, while herbivores occupy the next level as the primary consumers, known as first-order consumers. Carnivores that feed on herbivores are positioned at the third trophic level and are referred to as second-order consumers. It's important to note that only about 10% of the chemical energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next. Consequently, most food chains typically do not exceed 4 trophic levels. Ecological pyramids provide a visual model to describe various aspects of an ecosystem, including energy flow, nutrient recycling, and the relationships between different organisms. These pyramids are constructed by stacking boxes that represent the trophic or feeding levels within a particular ecosystem. The size of each box corresponds to the amount of the feature being examined. In an energy pyramid, the largest box is at the bottom, representing the producers, with smaller boxes above it for each subsequent trophic level, as one moves up the food chain. This basic shape reflects the principle that energy captured by producers is converted into chemical energy, but only about 10% of this energy is passed on to the next level. The remaining energy, approximately 90%, is lost to the environment as heat or waste. This significant decrease in energy is one reason food chains are limited in the number of trophic levels they can support. Additionally, the number of organisms that can exist at each trophic level is restricted. As one moves up the food chain or web, food availability diminishes, resulting in fewer individuals at each level. A pyramid of numbers illustrates the population sizes of organisms at each trophic level, while a pyramid of biomass represents the dry mass of organisms at those levels. The shapes of these pyramids can vary due to differences in reproduction rates or the mass of the organisms involved. And this is the end of Chapter 1. Thank you for watching.